A millionaire accidentally fell off his yacht without knowing how to swim. And the secretary was, "It's windier than usual today," Captain Richards remarked, adjusting his cap and tightening his coat around his shoulders. He glanced up at the grey sky, where low-hanging clouds drifted slowly, as if weighed down by heavy memories. James Whitmore ignored the comment. The sea breeze struck his face as he slowly walked along the teak deck of the Sea Whisper, gripping a crystal glass still more than half full of scotch on the rocks. The amber liquid shimmered with each step, catching the faded gold of the setting sun. The wind pressed his linen shirt against his lean frame, and his tousled grey hair gave him a wilder look than usual. Yet his posture remained straight and firm, like a man who had always been listened to and obeyed. He stopped at the stainless steel railing and stared out at the horizon. No land in sight, only sea. "Would you like to have dinner in the main cabin or out here tonight?" a female voice asked, soft yet matter-of-fact. Emily Grant had appeared behind him, as she had for the past 23 years. Brown hair neatly pinned in an elegant bun, grey skirt, long-sleeved white blouse, always discreet but impeccable. Her brown eyes were observant. She didn't smile easily, but when she did, it was genuine. "Out here," James said without turning. "Just need a few more minutes." She nodded, as she always did, and went back inside. Emily knew that when James fell silent at the end of the day, it was because he was thinking too much and saying too little. James looked back at the glass. He took a sip. It was his third of the day, which was unusual for him. He looked at his hands, prominent veins, long fingers, skin marked by time. How many people still saw that man as the business giant he had once been? How many knew that, behind the name printed in business magazines, there was just a man returning home to find empty hallways? The truth was, he no longer had anywhere to return to. The house in Palm Beach had felt like a mausoleum since Helen died, 6 years ago, 6 long years of silence and routine. James had money, power, and no emotional legacy to leave behind. No children, no living siblings, no nephews or nieces nearby. The name Whitmore would die with him, and strangely that didn't hurt as much as it probably should have. He took another step. The scotch sloshed slightly in the glass as the yacht rocked unexpectedly. The wind had picked up, the sky was darkening. Then came the moment. James turned left, distracted, maybe to go back inside, or maybe just to view the sea from a different angle. But his thin-soled shoe slipped on a wet patch of the deck. A sudden loss of balance, a short stumble, and then the sound of a body hitting the water. The noise was muffled by the waves and wind, but Emily heard it. She turned her head, confused, and didn't see James where he should have been. She ran to the railing. "Mr. Whitmore!" she shouted, already unbuttoning her blouse. Her eyes scanned the ocean with growing desperation. Then she saw him. James flailed his arms wildly, his head dipping below the surface and re-emerging in frantic intervals. His clothes dragged him down. He wasn't shouting, he was panicking, and he didn't know how to swim. Emily didn't hesitate. She kicked off her shoes and dove in, fully clothed. The water hit her like ice, brutal and shocking, but her years of swimming in youth, a part of life that felt distant now, kicked in as pure instinct. She swam hard against the current, which mocked her nearly 60 years. The yacht hadn't stopped. It continued gliding slowly on momentum. Emily cut through the waves until she reached James, who was already going under again. She grabbed him by the collar and yanked hard. He was still conscious but weak. He spluttered salt water and tried to grab onto anything, including her, not fully understanding what was happening. "Don't fight me," she shouted, pulling him up and kicking her legs to keep them afloat. Just trust." James coughed violently, spitting out a stream of seawater. Emily fought against his weight and her own exhaustion. Minutes felt like hours. By the time the crew noticed his absence and turned the yacht around, Emily was already running out of strength. 2 crewmen dove in with life rings. One grabbed James, the other took hold of Emily, who was gasping, unable to speak. On deck, lying face down, she vomited seawater and tried to breathe. Her mouth stung with salt, her chest ached, and beside her, the sound of James coughing and choking, but alive. The captain stood watching, speechless. A respectful silence fell over the few present. Emily sat up, soaked, trembling from cold and adrenaline, her hair plastered to her face. James, still lying down, slowly turned his head toward her. His eyes were bloodshot, his face as pale as a sail. He looked disoriented, and for the first time vulnerable. You pulled me back." Emily simply nodded. Her steady gaze didn't speak of heroism. It spoke of duty, loyalty, and something deeper, still unnamed even by her. James tried to speak but coughed again. Then he closed his eyes, exhausted. Emily remained there, sitting on the wet deck, watching the sky grow darker. And deep inside she knew something had changed forever. The smell of antiseptic and clean sheets filled the air as James opened his eyes. The brightness from the window made him squint, confused, before he recognized the white ceiling and the rhythmic beeping of a monitor beside the bed. His body felt heavy, like he'd been pulled from a shipwreck, which in a way was exactly what had happened. He turned his head with effort. There was a vase of white lilies on a small side table and an armchair. Emily stood beside the window, arms crossed, watching the clouds drift by with a thoughtful expression. She wore a simple blue blouse and light-colored pants, no heels, no makeup. Still, there was something in her posture that radiated dignity. "You jumped," he murmured, his voice hoarse. She turned slowly. Her ever-watchful eyes now held a quiet sense of relief. "Yes, sir," she replied, as if still in professional mode. But there was something in her tone, a slight crack in it. She stepped closer. "Are you feeling all right? Like someone who got hit by a ship, but alive?" Emily let out a small, restrained smile and pulled the chair closer to sit beside him. For a moment, they just looked at each other. There wasn't much to say. He knew it. She knew it. And whatever had been suspended between them was no longer invisible, just not yet decipherable. James looked away. "Did anyone else see?" "The crew noticed a few minutes later. I was the one who shouted first. Lucky we were close to the hydraulic stairs." He nodded slowly, staring at the ceiling. "I never learned to swim. Thought I'd never need to." "No one expects to fall off a 130-foot yacht, sir." James let out a brief, almost bitter laugh. He touched his face as if feeling his age for the first time. "How long have I been here?" 2 days. The Marinas Hospital recommended observation due to hypothermia risk, but you're out of danger now. All tests came back normal." He stayed silent for a moment, then turned more toward her. "Why did you do it?" Emily held his gaze, didn't flinch, didn't hesitate. "Because I'm the only person on that boat who truly knows you." He raised an eyebrow slightly. She continued. "Because even though you're my boss and live surrounded by numbers and contracts, I see the man that was left after Mrs. Whitmore passed. You seem strong, but inside, you've been drowning for years." James didn't respond. He didn't deny it. He just let the silence fill the room once more. The next morning, James was discharged. He declined the private jet and decided to drive to his house in Palm Beach. Emily came with him, sitting in the passenger seat, typing messages while he kept his eyes on the road. "Mrs. Helger is asking whether to cancel the vendors for the end-of-month event," she said, after reading an email. "Cancel everything," he replied, without looking at her, "and ask them to sell the yacht. Today." Emily looked up, surprised, but said nothing. They drove in silence for a few more miles until James spoke again, his voice steady but softer. "You stayed with me at the hospital." "I did," she replied plainly. "And why? Out of obligation? Professionalism?" She took a deep breath. "Because someone needed to be there, and there was no one else." Those words echoed inside him in a strange way, like a mirror reflecting a truth he had tried to ignore. At home, James withdrew for days. He spent hours wandering the garden aimlessly. He turned off his phone. The house felt bigger than before, emptier, colder. Almost all the memories he had shared with Helen had faded, replaced by a mechanical routine. His dusty executive trophies and awards meant nothing now. It was as if everything had been built for another man, in another life. He went to the office, rifled through old papers, letters. He eventually found a yellowed envelope, hidden among folders. He recognized the handwriting immediately. Helen. The letter was dated shortly before her final hospitalization. James hesitated before opening it. He took a deep breath, and then he read, "If one day you lose yourself, if you forget that there's more beyond control, beyond power, beyond responsibility, I want you to look for Emily. She sees what no one else sees in you. She is calm when everything around you is falling apart. She is your last lighthouse." He read it 3 times, as if he couldn't believe it. It had been there all along. A silent confession from the woman who had known him best. James stood up and looked at his own reflection in the office mirror. For the first time, he felt naked before something he couldn't control, and that's when he understood. Emily hadn't just saved his body. She had pulled him back from a far deeper abyss. And that, he still didn't know how to repay. The office door closed behind James with a soft but firm click. He stood there for a moment, simply looking around. The imposing furniture, the polished dark wood, the books aligned with surgical precision. A room that once symbolized control, dominance, clarity. Now it felt like he was locked inside a museum. He slowly sat down in the leather chair where so many million-dollar decisions had been made, his back straight, hands resting on the armrests. But his gaze was that of a man who was somewhere else entirely. The silence of the house was more than just an absence of sound. It was a presence, something that breathed with him. He picked up Helen's letter once more. It was lying on the desk next to a Mont Blanc pen and a half-full glass of water. His fingers moved slowly over the now slightly worn paper. He didn't read it again. He didn't need to. It was etched into him now. Emily. It was strange how her name, spoken quietly, seemed to carry a different weight now. She was in the kitchen, organizing folders and mail on the marble table. She wore charcoal grey dress pants and a navy blouse with a high collar. The bun, pinned with military precision, was still there, but her shoulders were slightly slumped, which on her was almost like a scream. James stepped in and watched her for a few seconds before announcing his presence with a soft clearing of his throat. She looked up immediately. "How was your night?" she asked. In silence. She nodded, already understanding that it was a deeper answer than it seemed. "We're going to make changes," he said, stepping closer to the kitchen island and resting his hands on the marble countertop. "Big changes." Emily raised an eyebrow slightly. "What kind?" "Sell the yacht. Cancel the company party. Close at least 2 of the properties. I want to focus on the foundation, public health, accessible vaccines." Helen always wanted that. Emily crossed her arms, leaning gently against the counter. "Are you sure?" James didn't hesitate. For the first time in years, she kept watching him, as if trying to understand what lay behind this new conviction. And what she saw she had never seen before, vulnerability without weakness. "All right, we'll start today. You're coming with me. I want you to lead this, not just as my assistant, as a director." Emily blinked, genuinely surprised. I'm not sure I'm ready." James walked toward her, not intrusively but with intent. He stopped just a few steps away. "How long have you been with me, Emily?" 23 years. You know every aspect of my professional life, but more than that, you know me when no one else does." She said nothing. He didn't press for a response. He just nodded, as if stating the obvious, and turned to leave. In the days that followed, the house became a hub of reorganization. Consultants were dismissed, properties appraised, and as promised, the Sea Whisper was listed for sale. James declined interviews, declined social engagements. When the press called, Emily gave the standard reply, "Mr. Whitmore is reassessing his personal and professional priorities." But there was more than just logistical movement. James and Emily began sharing the same spaces more frequently. Long meetings stretched into dinners. Walks in the garden became routine. Conversations that were once formal took on subtle tones of intimacy. No overt gestures, no flirting, just a new rhythm where silence between them no longer felt uncomfortable. One evening, after a meeting about the Foundation's new strategy, Emily closed her laptop and leaned back in the library chair. "I thought you'd never stop." "Stop what?" "Running. Filling your time with everything except yourself." James looked at the glass of whiskey on the table, then back at her. "So did I. But something pulled me back." She understood. She didn't smile, just lowered her eyes quietly. That night, James didn't sleep in the master bedroom. He stayed in the library late into the night, rereading Helen's old letters, remembering forgotten conversations. He realized that true grief isn't the tears shed at a funeral, it's the silence of the choices never made. Emily. Helen had seen her long before he did, and now he was beginning to see too. But it wasn't time to speak it yet. There was still an inner crossing to make, and James knew, not all men learn to swim with the body, some learn with the soul. The old vault door opened with a soft metallic click, releasing a faint scent of aged paper and worn leather. James turned on the interior light, revealing neatly arranged folders, old photo albums and small objects that had once belonged to Helen. He stood there for a moment, hands in his pockets, looking in as if he were gazing at a shrine. It was Saturday morning, and sunlight filtered through the heavy library curtains, casting golden stripes across the wooden floor. The silence of the house was broken only by the distant ticking of the wall clock. James reached out and picked up a blue velvet box. Inside were letters, notes, and a small framed photo of the two of them in Tuscany, laughing at an outdoor restaurant. Helen wore a light dress and dark sunglasses. He had his shirt sleeves rolled up and wore a smile he no longer remembered how to give. There, in that warm light and the scent of memory, his fingers found the letter again. That same letter, the one he had already read, but now seemed to beg to be read again. More slowly, with more maturity. He sat in the leather chair and unfolded the paper. If one day you lose yourself, Helen's voice echoed clearly in his mind. If you forget that there is more beyond control, beyond power, beyond responsibility. He leaned his head back, closing his eyes for a moment. I want you to look for Emily. She sees what no one else sees in you. Her name, written there in Helen's elegant handwriting, struck him like a whisper at the base of his neck. She is your last lighthouse. James let the paper rest in his lap. His head fell forward slightly. It was as if Helen had foreseen everything. As if she had known the man she loved would one day become lost, and that Emily would be what stood between him and the wreckage. That afternoon he stepped out into the garden. Emily was in the outdoor seating area, sitting with her laptop on her knees and a stack of documents beside her. She wore dark jeans and a white linen shirt. Her bare feet rested on a cushion on the floor. It was an uncommon image, less rigid, more human. James approached without haste. May I interrupt? She looked up and smiled, a quiet but welcoming smile. Of course, I was just reviewing the research center reports. He sat in the lounge chair beside her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Only the sound of the wind in the leaves filled the space. Did you know Helen wrote about you? Emily paused her typing. She turned, surprised, but with a serenity that seemed to have always been part of her. No. What did she say? James looked at her with a mix of respect and confession in his eyes. His voice was softer than usual, but steady. She said you were my last lighthouse. Emily looked away for a moment. Her eyes blinked quickly, as if processing the weight of what he'd just said. There were no smiles, no tears, only a reverent stillness. She was a very wise woman, she said at last. James nodded. She was, and more generous than I was with her many times. You were different back then. Maybe, or maybe I was just trying to look whole. The wind picked up and a few dry leaves danced across the lawn. Emily gently closed the laptop and turned fully toward him. And now? Now I'm trying to figure out what to do with all of this. She waited, without pressing. You know, Emily, James continued, running a hand through his thinning hair, I thought my life had been well lived, that I'd done everything right, but I'm starting to realize that building isn't the same as feeling, and I built so much without feeling almost anything. Emily folded her hands in her lap. But you're still here. There's still time. James looked at her with intensity, for the first time without the polish of status, authority, or legacy. How long have you been waiting for me to really see you? She smiled, small, calm. But she didn't answer, because it wasn't a question with a simple answer. That night, As the house settled into quiet, James went down alone to the wine cellar. He grabbed a bottle that had been stored for years, a Barolo Helen had loved, and brought it upstairs. He set it on the table on the veranda, where 2 glasses were already waiting. Emily arrived shortly after, wearing a light sweater over her shoulders, her hair down for the first time he could remember. She looked at the bottle, then at him. "You're toasting with a wine that wasn't your favorite?" "Exactly, because maybe now, it's not about me anymore." She sat down. He poured for both of them. They raised their glasses. No formal words, no grand toasts. But in the silence between the clinking of crystal, something was sealed. A new way of being together. Not declared love, not labeled friendship. Just 2 adult souls, finally recognizing each other in the light of truth. "You want to donate half the shares of the holding company?" asked Martin Gray, James's lawyer and personal advisor for over 15 years, adjusting his glasses on his round face as he looked down at the documents on the table. James nodded calmly, his gaze steady, voice low but resolute. "Half. To the foundation, and I want the change to take effect before the end of the fiscal quarter." Martin sighed. His fingers tapped lightly on the leather folder. "It's going to cause an impact. It'll raise questions." "So what?" "So, it's your name. Your structure built over decades." James rose from his chair and walked to the window. The morning outside was clear, blue sky, still palm trees, as if the wind itself had paused to listen. "Maybe it's time they stop talking about my name and start talking about something I actually did." Martin didn't reply. He simply nodded slowly, respectfully. He understood that something had shifted in the old Whitmore, something no balance sheet could explain. The changes began to unfold like dominoes. The Aspen mansion was quietly listed for sale. The property in the Virgin Islands too. Luxury cars were sent to charity auctions. Investment consultants were stunned. But James didn't seem shaken. On the contrary, he appeared more present, more lucid, more active than he had in years. The Helen Whitmore Foundation, named in honor of his late wife, was officially established. Its mission: to fund research and distribution of vaccines in underserved communities across the United States and Latin America. Emily was appointed executive director. The internal announcement surprised a few, but no one dared question it. She had already been managing the backstage of James's life with mastery for over 2 decades. "Never thought I'd see my name at the top of an org chart," she said one afternoon, organizing early partnership reports with community clinics. "You've always been at the top, Emily," James replied as he passed by with a light touch on her shoulder, rare, almost intimate, and disappeared down the hall. The new pace of life brought them closer in a natural way. Meetings that would once have been cold and pragmatic now started with shared coffee and casual talk. Working lunches became moments of reflection on decisions, doubts, even memories. One Friday afternoon, after visiting a clinic in a Tampa suburb, the two were driving back. James was behind the wheel himself, having insisted on driving ever since he decided to relearn how to live. Emily sat beside him, flipping through papers, though her gaze was more on the window than on the spreadsheets. "Remember when we went to that conference in Mexico?" she asked with a quiet smile. "I do. You hated the heat. I hated more the suit you insisted on wearing, even in 95-degree weather." James laughed, a light, natural laugh. It had been a long time since he'd laughed like that. "You thought I was unbearable back then. I thought you were always trying to be bigger than you were, and it wore you out." He didn't reply right away. He just glanced briefly at her, then back to the road. "I was." Emily returned to silence respectfully. But she sensed that some kind of reconciliation was taking place, not just with her. James was reconciling with himself. Another weekend with the garden now simpler, less ornamental and more authentic. At his request, the two walked side by side at sunset. He wore light khakis and a rolled-up shirt. Emily wore a simple cotton dress. No formalities, no masks. "Have you ever thought about stopping?" he asked. "Stopping work? Stopping everything, disappearing, starting over somewhere else?" She reflected for a few seconds. I have, a few times, but I always lacked the final push. Maybe I was waiting for someone to ask. James stopped walking, turned to her, his eyes steady but gentle. What if I told you I'm thinking about it now? She looked at him unwavering. I didn't come this far to run away from my life, James. I came to live the part of it that never got started. The words hung in the air between them, no movement, just that heavy silence that precedes everything real. I don't know where this leads, Emily, but I want to find out. She nodded. There was no rush. As the weeks passed, the Foundation's projects took root. Emily became a constant presence in meetings, interviews, and communications with researchers. James didn't seek the spotlight. He let her lead, let her shine, and sometimes watched her as if he were meeting someone new, when in truth she had been there all along. He just hadn't seen her. One evening, after a dinner following the inauguration of a lab they had funded, they sat on the veranda of the house, wine glasses in hand, instrumental music drifting softly from a speaker in the corner. I never imagined, James began. What? That I could find peace after 70. Peace never had an expiration date. We're just slow to accept that we deserve it. He turned to her, gazing for a few seconds. Then he said sincerely, without dramatics, I thought I was hiring you to organize my life, but maybe you came to teach me how to live. Emily smiled. She didn't respond. She simply reached out across the table, no grand gesture. He took her hand, with the firmness of someone who knows what they want. In that moment there was no contract, no past, no emotional debt. Just two grown adults weathered by life, marked by choices, sharing a present that felt like it had been written long before it ever began. And that, for both of them, was more than enough. You don't have to decide now, James said, slowly setting his fork down on the empty plate. Dinner had been light, served under the warm glow of the pergola lights in the backyard garden. The scent of lavender lingered in the air, mixed with the distant sound of crickets and dry leaves rustling. I just wanted to put it on the table. Emily brought her wine glass to her lips slowly without taking her eyes off him. The pale linen shirt James wore highlighted his recent tan, a result of his frequent visits to the Foundation's field projects. But it was his gaze that stood out most, not anxious, not hesitant, just quietly resolute. She rested her glass on the table and folded her arms, still holding the stem between her fingers. What exactly are you proposing? James took a deep breath, ran a hand over his face, then clasped his fingers together on the table. I'm proposing a beginning, not a contract, not a title, not some romantic promise. I'm talking about the possibility of sharing life, of being together, as partners, in the work, in the days, in the everyday. Emily didn't respond right away. She stood and walked to the edge of the garden, where a solitary tree cast its shadow over the grass. She stood there, her back to him, looking at the partly clouded sky. James didn't move. He waited. You know what this sounds like? She said at last, still facing away. It sounds like gratitude, like trying to make up for everything that's happened. And with all due respect, James, I don't need that. He stood up calmly, approached her slowly, keeping some distance. His voice came low, almost a whisper. I know, and that's exactly why I choose you. Because you never needed me, because you stayed, even when there was nothing left to gain. Emily turned around. Her eyes were misty but not fragile, steady, brave. You're confused. It's natural. After what you've been through, after what's changed, it's easy to project. But being with me, James, isn't about starting over. It's about facing everything that's been buried for 23 years. It's knowing that I was there day after day, watching you love another woman, build another home, suffer and shut down. And even so you stayed, he replied without hesitation. Emily looked at him for a long moment, then lowered her eyes. I stayed because you were my world for so long, without even knowing it, and I accepted that. I accepted being invisible, being discreet, being useful. James stepped a little closer, now level with her. He didn't touch her, he just spoke honestly. "You were never invisible, I was just blind." She smiled, and this time, it was real. A smile that held exhaustion, yes, but also release. "And now? Now, what I want us to be two free adults, choosing each other. No debts, no guilt." Emily nodded, looked at the sky, then at him. "Then let's start like that, slowly. No rush, one step at a time." "One step at a time," James echoed. In the days that followed, their time together settled into a new rhythm. Lighter, more intimate, though not overtly romantic. It was as if they were both feeling out the edges of something new, careful not to disturb the fragile balance built over so much silence and time. They began having dinner together almost every night. There was no formality. Sometimes they ate in silence, watching the news. Other times they talked for hours about the Foundation's future, about aging without regret. One of those nights, sitting on the porch with coffee and light blankets around their shoulders, Emily spoke without warning. "Have you ever imagined what you'd say to Helen if you could talk to her now?" James fell silent, his face serious, eyes fixed on the dark garden ahead. "I'd tell her. She was right about you." Emily closed her eyes briefly, feeling the words like an embrace. "And you?" he asked. "What would you say to your 20 years younger self?" She sighed. "I'd say, wait. He'll see you one day, and when he does, he won't look away again." James turned his head slowly to face her. It was dark, but his eyes still shone, like someone who had finally found solid ground after drifting for years. At the Foundation's headquarters, the staff began to notice the shift between the two. It wasn't spoken nor declared, but it was there, in the small gestures, the glances exchanged, the way he listened to Emily, the way she led everything with quiet authority. It was partnership, and it was respect. At a meeting with sponsors, James referred to her as the woman who's kept me sane these past few months. No one commented, but everyone understood. One morning, as they sorted documents in the main room, Emily suddenly paused, holding an old photograph of Helen, James, and some former business partners. "Have you forgiven yourself yet?" she asked without looking at him. James picked up another folder and flipped through it absently. "Not completely, but I'm trying. Sometimes you don't need to wipe the slate clean to move forward. You just need to accept that pain builds too." He nodded. "And you?" Emily smiled. "I'm trying too." Autumn came with cooler winds and shorter days. The Foundation continued to grow. Life's pace slowed down. And between decisions and coffees, James and Emily built something that had no name. But for them, it was enough. It was a kind of love that didn't shout, that didn't rush. A love built with the cement of shared days, recognition, and conscious choice. And that, both of them knew, was the only kind of love that survives the decades. The flashes burst like silent thunder as James stepped out of the car. The press was already gathered at the entrance of the hotel, where the Helen Whitmore Foundation's charity gala was about to take place. The event would mark the official announcement of a new research center, fully funded by him, and the atmosphere buzzed with cameras, reporters, and speculation. But that night, it wouldn't be the project that caused the biggest stir. James adjusted his dark suit jacket and walked with his usual calm into the ballroom. Beside him, Emily wore a sober dress, elegant and understated, her hair pulled back in its usual simple style. There was confidence in her walk, but also a trace of tension in her jaw. She knew what was coming. Just hours earlier, James's attorneys had warned him the new will had been leaked to the press, a document not yet officially registered, but whose digital copy had somehow ended up in the wrong hands. Its contents were clear. Emily Grant was named the sole heir of his personal estate. A decision made quietly weeks ago was now exploding into a public scandal. Inside the ballroom, eyes turned toward the two of them with thinly veiled curiosity. Smiles grew more cautious. Whispers surged through the room like a live current. Emily held her posture. So did James. The host took the stage, delivered a brief speech about the Foundation, made a few light-hearted jokes, and announced, "And now, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage the man who made all of this possible, Mr. James Whitmore. Applause, some warm, others polite. James walked up to the stage with his usual presence, but those who knew him well, and in that room few truly did, noticed something different. The weight he usually carried had been replaced by a strange lightness. He stopped at the podium, looked out over the room and began. "Good evening." His voice carried clearly. He held no notes. He didn't need them. "Tonight, I'm not going to talk about numbers, or social impact, or legacy." A hush fell. Glasses were set down on tables. "Tonight I want to talk about debt and gratitude." Some faces frowned. The tension was rising. "For many years I was called a strategist, a cold man, someone who could lead but rarely listened. That reputation isn't entirely unfair, but it's also not the whole truth." He paused, continued, voice slightly lower. "Because for over 20 years, I had by my side a woman who not only listened for me, but felt for me, who held up my emotional structure while I kept up appearances." He looked toward Emily, still seated at the head table, unmoving. "Emily Grant was not my secretary. She was my anchor, my conscience, my quietest friend, and over time, my salvation." A collective sigh rippled through the room. The event's camera zoomed in on his face, now more open than it had ever been at any board meeting. "When the news leaked today that she is my sole heir, many questioned the reasons. Some suggested manipulation, others madness. But let me say this clearly here and now. The only thing between Emily and my estate is justice." Another pause. "When someone saves your life twice, first at sea, then in your soul, they don't deserve a percentage. They deserve everything." He didn't wait. Applause began softly, then swelled. Some stood, others clapped cautiously. But it came. Emily didn't move. She simply kept her eyes on James. And in that moment she knew. Their truth had finally been spoken. Later, alone in the car on the way home, she broke the silence. "You didn't have to say all that." "I did. You think it changed anything?" He turned to her. They were parked in front of the house, bathed in headlight glow. "It changed things for me." Emily rested her hands in her lap, unhurried. "People will keep talking. Some will try to challenge it legally. Others will say you're emotionally compromised." James gave a short, humorless laugh. "Good. Let them think I'm compromised. Because all my life I was called unshakable, and all that ever brought me was loneliness." She watched him for a moment, then looked out the window. "When you wrote that will, did you think about how I'd feel?" "I did. I thought you'd refuse, that you'd say you didn't want it, and I still think maybe you will." She took a deep breath. "I don't want your money, James. I know. And that's exactly why I want you to have it. Because you don't want it. Because you deserve it. Because it's not about inheritance, it's about trust." Emily unbuckled her seatbelt and opened the door. "Tomorrow we'll talk about it. Tonight, I just want to sleep without carrying the weight of your name on my chest." He nodded. Didn't try to stop her. He knew she wasn't running, she just needed time. In the middle of the night, as he walked alone through the house, James stopped in front of the unlit fireplace. There was a box there. Inside, Helen's old envelope. He opened it once again. "If one day you lose yourself," he smiled for the first time in a long while with tenderness. Because now he knew he had found himself again. Not in titles, not in properties, but in the woman who stayed when everything else fell away. The salty breeze drifted through the open windows of the seaside house, carrying with it the rhythmic sound of waves breaking against the rocks. James sat on the side porch, a mug of coffee in his hands. He wore a light cotton shirt and pale linen pants. His bare feet rested on the sun-warmed wooden boards. He watched the ocean with calm, attentive eyes. That house, simple and welcoming, had replaced the marble and glass palaces where he'd spent most of his life. There were no uniformed staff, no expensive artworks on the walls. There were stacks of books on low shelves, an old record player playing soft jazz, and the constant scent of lavender from the garden Emily tended herself. She appeared a few moments later, her hair loose, a cup in hand. She wore a light blue dress and a quiet smile that now came more often. She sat beside him in a woven straw chair. Neither of them spoke at first. There was no more urgency between them. "Did you sleep well?" she asked after a few minutes. "Like a rock," James replied, turning slightly to look at her. "For the first time in weeks." Emily smiled, gazing at the horizon. The Sea Whisper, now permanently docked in the small private marina, stood still, silent, more a symbol than a vessel. It no longer sailed. It had become a piece of memory, lovingly restored, but never showy. "I never thought I'd see that yacht sitting still," she said lightly. "It always seemed like it needed to be moving." "It was a reflection of who I was," James said. "A man who never stopped, who kept running even when there was nowhere to go." Emily looked at him, and he held her gaze for a few seconds. In that silence there was more truth than in any grand declaration. "You know, sometimes I wonder if I did all this too late," James confessed, "if the time for change had already passed." She leaned in slightly, resting her hand on his. "The time to change is always the next breath. You're living now, James, and you're living well." He smiled faintly, touched by the calm strength of the woman beside him. There was a vast difference between being saved and allowing oneself to be saved, and he had finally learned to do both. At lunch, they ate grilled fish, salad, and homemade bread that Emily insisted on baking every Sunday. The table was small, facing the sea, with a simple linen cloth and mismatched dishes. That afternoon they walked hand in hand along the short stretch of beach that remained untouched by tourists. Their footprints formed a parallel trail to the bend in the shoreline. Later, seated on the wooden steps that led down to the sand, James spoke, almost as if confessing to himself, "I used to believe life was all about building, companies, reputation, wealth, as if it would last." "And it did," Emily replied gently, "just not in the way you imagined." He looked at her, curious. "What do you mean?" "You built the path that brought you here, but what lasts is what you touched in people, what you changed, what you shared, and that is just beginning." James leaned forward slightly, elbows resting on his knees. The sun was starting to set, turning the sky golden. "I thought Helen was the love of my life," he said with respect. "And maybe she was. But what I'm discovering with you is that love doesn't have to be just one thing. It can be new. It can be mature. It can be built over time." Emily listened without interrupting. The breeze played softly with the loose strands of her hair. "And that's why," James continued, "I want to say something to you, here now, with no witnesses, no papers, no ceremony." She turned toward him, attentive. "If I had to live it all over again, all the falls, all the silences, all the pride, just to find you at this exact point in life, I would do it all again, because only now do I understand what it means to be whole with someone." Emily didn't answer right away. She simply leaned in and rested her head on his shoulder. And they stayed there, watching the sea. Months later, the foundation had grown. Its headquarters moved into a smaller, more functional building in the heart of a quieter town. James and Emily lived far from cameras, from invitations, from headlines. But his name and hers had come to mean something else entirely. Quiet transformation. The clinics supported by the foundation began to make a real difference in thousands of lives. No fanfare, no spectacle. And whenever people asked why he had changed so much, James simply said, "I learned to listen to the person who'd been beside me all along." One night, Emily found a letter on the table out on the porch. It was James's handwriting, short, direct. "It was never the yacht. It was always you." She smiled, sat down, and read it again. There was no signature. It didn't need one, because now at last they were where they were meant to be. Two hearts in the same sea, and neither of them adrift anymore. Hear what it meant to you. Remember to hit the like and subscribe buttons. This is really important for the channel. Really important. And if you're ready for another story of love and hope, click the first card or the second one to watch the full playlist. See you there.